Tom Simpson. I'm the interim director, coordinator of the assembly program here at Phillips Exeter, and I'm also a member of the faculty in the religion department. Tonight's gathering, tonight's speaker is here under the auspices of a local group called We the People, and also as part of our brag fellowship. So I'm going to give you a few little opening words about We the People and the brag fellowship. So if you are part of We the People, part of the Academy community that heard about the We the People, We the People is started in 2005 by two former faculty members at the Academy, Lou Hitzrow and Donna Cole, in conjunction with the Water Street Bookstore and members of the Congregational, Unitarian, and Episcopal churches in town. The series that We the People sponsors explores topics at the intersection of current events, ethics, and religion. The Henry Bragdon Fellowship was established in 2008 by several alumni to honor Henry Bragdon, a beloved instructor of history and renowned scholar who taught at Exeter from 1945 to 1972. Mr. Bragdon instilled in his students a great sense of the American experience and a deep appreciation for public service. In his honor, we bring to campus each year a distinguished individual who can illuminate compelling issues and inspire debate within our community. This year, we are very pleased to welcome Gina McCarthy as our 2017 Bragdon Fellow. Ms. McCarthy has dedicated her 35-year career in public service to environmental protection and public health. Her leadership and perseverance has led to federal, state, and local actions on critical environmental issues, including clean energy, public transportation, and public health goals while fostering economic growth. From 2003 to 2017, Ms. McCarthy served as Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency under President Obama. In this role, she was the nation's leading advocate for common sense strategies to protect public health and the environment. Willing to take bold action, Administrator McCarthy achieved notable success by finalizing the Clean Power Plan, which set the first national standards to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for fossil fuel-fired power plants. The CPP demonstrated the United States' strong commitment to climate action, sparking broad international support for adoption of the Paris Climate Agreement. Under her leadership, the EPA also finalized a Clean Water Rule to protect rivers and streams that 117 million Americans rely on for their source of drinking water. Prior to joining the EPA, Ms. McCarthy served 5 Massachusetts Democratic and Republican administrations and was the Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. Ms. McCarthy currently serves as Professor of the Practice of Public Health in the Department of Environmental Health at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health. On January 1st, 2018, she will step up as Director of Harvard Chan Center for Health and the Global Environment, leading the development of the school's strategy in climate science, health, and sustainability. A native of Massachusetts, Ms. McCarthy earned a Bachelor of Arts in Social Anthropology from the University of Massachusetts at Boston, and a joint Master of Science in Environmental Health Engineering, Planning, and Policy from Tufts University. Please join me in welcoming Gina McCarthy to Exeter.
Happy here. It's good to be here for me. It's a wonderful evening, and I'm happy. And I will tell you that my speech is shorter than the introduction, so you'll be taking that. I thought I would speak for maybe a half an hour, and then we'll have a chance for discussion and back and forth. At least that's the plan, unless I get overly excited with myself. But it is exciting to be here, and I tell everybody that because no matter where I am, it's better than being in Washington, D.C. So the only place I don't say that is in Washington, D.C. But really, it is a very uncertain time right now, and I know that, which is why I'm going out and talking to people to try to sort of calm some nerves and try to keep things in perspective for both myself and for you. Because what I find is that every morning when I get up, all I hear is my husband yelling at MSNBC. Before I even have a cup of coffee, he's ranting and raving. So I tell him to shut the TV off, and shut other things, and let's get moving. And You know, I do have to say that I do worry about EPA. I worry about EPA in its 47 years of history potentially being significantly weakened as a federal agency. And I know probably better than most about why you need it and what it does. And having worked at the local and state level for as long as I have, and now working at the federal level, I understand the interplay between those levels of government and why they're so essential. And I know that EPA has been such a fundamental driver of such healthy places to live, work, and play that we enjoy. Drinking water that we can feel confident in drinking. Clean air that doesn't look like it used to look, which many of us remember. And I do feel that at times that even the challenges and the efforts that we have moved forward to really address the most difficult and in fact very challenging problem of climate change, all of that seems to be up in the air. And I will tell you, it is up in the air because it's not just the agency being challenged and all the work we did moving forward, but it also is really very much about the fate of EPA and essentially the fate of science as well, and how we think about science and how we use it in making decisions. And I think many of us feel like democracy itself is being a bit undermined. Other than that, I think things are great. Just want to let you know. As my mother would say, it feels like we're going to hell in a handbasket, which is my favorite saying because nobody knows what a handbasket is. Why people say that, I don't know. But apparently it's the destination and not the vehicle that's important in that sense. But I do think we do have to take a little bit of a step back and do our best not to just throw our hands in the air and say, I think things are terrible, let's just wait it out, or get discouraged or depressed. You know, there have always been changes in the United States of America, and we have never struggled through those changes except on the backbones of each and every one of us. It calls us to action. It's telling us we have to be better citizens. And frankly, on a personal level, I found that people really don't want to hang around with you if all you do is complain. I've tried it my whole life and it's never worked. And even now, you know, I'm really trying to not just walk around as little Miss Grumpy Gus or Debbie Downer, with all due respects for all the Debbies and the Gusses in the audience. It's not a good thing to be. And so I really have found that because I'm so in my own neighborhood in Boston, people see me as being EPA and they absolutely expect me to be devastated every day of my life. So I walk around Jamaica Pond with my dog and you can see people literally saying, oh God, she's right there, we're going to have to walk by her. and so they always go, this is exactly what they do. Gina, how are you? Like, oh my Lord, nobody died, folks. You know, my kids are not called a clean power plant and they're doing okay. So you just really have to realize that part of what we need to do, and part of the reason why I'm here at Exeter, is that if you get hopeless, then just look at the younger generation. Because the best thing I ever did, leaving Washington, D.C. on January 20th, of last year at noontime, was to go hang out with young people. I did a couple of fellowships at Harvard. And if you start getting hopeless, then I'm going to have to slap you upside your head. Because the young people don't need it and they don't deserve it. And they are not hopeless. They are starting their life in the best country in the world. And we can't sit around and look like everything is falling apart. It is only going to fall apart if the United States lets it. I love being here and I love We the People because it reminds you who people in Washington are supposed to work for. And it should remind you that each and every one of you still has power to step up and make your voice be heard. And in fact, if you do not do that, then you are ceding your responsibility as a citizen in a country that we all cherish. So if you're worried about the direction that this country is heading, then what I say is get the frown off your face and get moving. Start doing things. Start thinking about how you can be part of solutions moving forward. Do not let yourself be depressed into inaction, because it is simply not the way in which you can allow yourself to behave at a time when really it is a call to action. And so I am excited when I see the young people today. I have never seen such smart, well-read, so aware a generation. They are incredibly conscious of social justice and inequity issues. And if there's anything that's, I think, more disturbing in this country and more potentially the underpinnings of the unrest today, it really is the social inequity issues. There are too many haves and have-nots, and I think we have to continue to work on that. So I'm pretty excited about it. But at the same time, we all have to recognize that at this point in time, partisanship in this country is very challenging. And it's, in fact, very disturbing, because it's not just, Democrats and Republicans, but it feels like it's East and West and North and the Midwest, not like in either coast, and the coast not like in the Midwest. And it's like everything from reds and blues to rural and urban America thinking differently. For the first time, I saw polling that was done last summer that actually said that liberals are moving into the city out of rural areas and conservatives are moving to rural areas. Is that really what we have come to now? Is we can't even live with one another in the same neighborhood because we have differing political opinions? I really think we have to think about this. And the only good thing about it is it maintains the distance between Red Sox Nation and Yankees territory. If it ever sort of broke that up, I'm out of here. But really we have to worry, I think, about some of the checks and balances that we always relied on between branches of government that don't seem to be respected as they have always been respected. And I worry about an independent press that's always being criticized for being somehow politically, factually incorrect. So we have to think about, I think, very seriously about where we are, how we got it, and move forward. Because I am absolutely convinced it's not just about Democrats and Republicans. Not the Democrats and Republicans I know. Because as Tom indicated, I worked for 6 governors. I was actually appointed by Governor Dukakis in his second term in Massachusetts. You all remember Governor Dukakis. Well, do you remember Governor Romney? I worked for him too. And guess what? We got really good things done. Governor Romney actually signed a climate action plan that I developed and wrote, and I sat with him and he read every single sentence of it and agreed to move it forward because the actions we were taking were not just good for the environment, but good for the economy. So don't tell me that we can't make progress or we can't talk to one another moving forward. Because the governor I worked for in Connecticut, Jody Rell, was the only governor that actually signed on to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative because we designed it right. She was going to hang in there, even though at that point in time, Governor Romney decided not to sign on. And that has been an invaluable tool to show that you can actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity sector, while at the same time generating revenues that kept energy demand down through energy efficiency and kept prices down. So we have to start being positive that there's work that can be done and is being done at all levels of government, and that the environment was never and can never be looked at as being a partisan issue. That, because I don't know of any Republican or Democrat who doesn't want their kids to be healthy, who doesn't want them to have an ability to breathe clean air and have clean drinking water. If you don't believe that, then go around shutting people's drinking water off. See how they react. It won't go well. So we have to get back to recognizing that we are one country, that the values that EPA represents, the values that say, I want my kids to be healthy, and I want clean air, clean water, safe land, and a stable planet. Those are values that we all must share. Now you can argue about how to get there. just don't denigrate the science that underpins those decisions. Because that science is what brought us all together and had the success that we have had in building a future that is so good for our health and our well-being. But our job is nowhere near done, folks. If you think it is, then you're not looking far enough at what is happening in the world today and the challenges that we're facing. Because everybody wants to breathe clean air, but there are 125 million or so people in the United States of America that is living in areas that do not meet health-based air quality standards. And we also have almost 130 million people drinking water that rely on rivers and streams that have yet to be sufficiently protected. 55% of the river miles in the United States of America don't have really healthy ecosystems. 55% of the river miles and streams. That is unbelievable, but it is true. And we are seeing really creepy new chemicals. Well, that's a technical term, get used to it. Like PFOS and PFOA that is coming into our drinking water now. And we have, at EPA, not ever issued a new contaminant to be regulated under the drinking water system since 1997. Now that's because it's so difficult to do the science because changes Congress made that our hands are tied in terms of having the nimbleness to use science as a way to continue to protect our drinking water to the maximum extent that you and I think it should be protected. So we have challenges. And the biggest challenge I think we know we face is the existential challenge of climate change. And that is a challenge that President Obama used to say that we are the first generation to feel the impacts of climate change, and we are the last generation to be able to do something about it. So the very last thing I'm going to say to the students at Exeter is good luck, I did the best I could. It's not going to cut it, folks. You know, I'm 63, I got a good 20, 25 more years when I'm going to try to kick butts and make things happen. And that's the attitude we need to bring to these kids, because I'm not going to tell them that I messed it up, you have to fix it. That's just not fair. And so we have to work hard together to give them a sense of positiveness moving forward. They need to be optimistic. They need to understand the scope of how life used to be versus where we are today. If you think about it, many of you will remember, as I do, what the world used to look like when we were little kids. It was not pleasant. It was not clean air. If you lived in Los Angeles, it doesn't look anything like it looks today, except with the forest fires, it might, actually. But we had difficulty. I remember I lived in Boston Harbor, and that's where I used to go to vacation. I used to swim in Boston Harbor, only the challenge was you used to have to pick the tar balls off of your legs as you got out of the water, because it was so heavily contaminated that later on physicians would say if you fell in it, you better get a couple of shots. That explains my health at that point in time, I think, was the fact that I was swimming in it all the time as a kid. But that's what we had available. We had rivers that were burning. We had Love Canal. We just don't have those situations in the United States anymore, but other countries do. 9 million people every year die as a result of exposure to pollution in the world. We have to do better than we have been doing before. We can't let science and scientists down by pretending that the science isn't real, because we just don't want to take the political hit for moving solutions forward. And what's most frustrating to me on the issue of climate is I've been working at it for, 30, 35 years, and all of a sudden we actually have solutions. And now we're going to deny the science? Can we just embrace a future that actually has clean air and cheap electricity? Can we talk about electric vehicles that actually will be as powerful as our imagination and our science and our technology will drive it, if we send the signal that we want it. That's what it's like in the United States, and that signal is being sent by China, not by the United States at this point, because they're demanding electric vehicles. They're the ones that's going to tell our companies to stop talking about rolling back standards and start rolling those vehicles that are clean and will help them keep their cities clean and our cities clean if we just continue the momentum moving forward. And I know you've heard about all the rollbacks, but I have to tell you a couple of things about all the rollbacks. First of all, I will admit that it kind of ticks me off. I don't want to pretend that my feelings aren't hurt. Well, my feelings aren't hurt, but I don't want to pretend that it isn't frustrating, because we took a lot of really good actions in the prior administration, and I have never seen an administration come in and their sole movement forward at the Environmental Protection Agency is to undo everything that the prior administration did, or even contemplated doing, I think. I'm putting a little foil around my head so they can't think of my thoughts now. That may not happen. It is frustrating, but a couple of things you need to understand, and this goes back to your civics lessons that we all may forget, is that in order to roll back a rule, you cannot have a tweet do it. Twittering is not sufficient in the courts. And you also actually have to, other than think of new policies, you legitimately have to explain why that rule failed, either by science or under the law or by a record that it had. And this administration doesn't seem to understand that. One of the reasons being is that most of them have never been in government before, and they're not talking to their career staff, which really are the only ones capable with the history and the technology expertise and the legal expertise to be able to write a repeal rule in a way that's going to pass muster in the courts. So what you see is a hunkering down in the EPA, where a few people are looking at writing repeals of rules, thinking, like in the case of the clean water rule that we moved forward, they'd like to get rid of that. And the repeal rule basically said, not a challenge on the science, not a challenge on the law. They said they didn't challenge either one of those. They didn't even challenge the process or the procedures. Did we follow the procedures? Did we develop a record? Did we answer comments? Did we do our hearings? Blah, 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 blah. They just said that the president issued an executive order and told them to do it. Now, when I used a similar excuse at home and blamed everything on my sisters, it didn't work. And likewise, this will not work, because rules are designed to provide business certainty. A final rule is very hard to do and to withstand the inevitable challenge in court. And when you do a rule, it tells the business community and individuals and states and cities what the rules of the road are moving forward. No administration has the right to just decide, I'm going to change everything and roll everything back over those 8 years. And they did the same thing with the Clean Power Plan repeal. Now, the Clean Power Plan was a rule that literally we spent years thinking about and doing. Millions and millions of comments. 4.3 million comments. Not because it was so terrible, everybody needed a comment on it, because the vast majority were positive comments, but I'm proud that we actually reached 4.3 million people on something that was as important as reducing the kind of greenhouse gas emissions from our fossil fuel sector that is contributing so significantly to the challenge of climate change. Because until we did that, we would not get international credibility to be able to help design and push forward an agreement like the Paris Agreement. And this administration decided they wanted to take it away. And how did they do that? They wrote I think it's 45 pages, a repeal rule. And that rule, again, doesn't challenge the science. It doesn't challenge the record. It actually speaks to the legal issues, but the legal issues are already in front of the DC Circuit now, Let them be heard, let a decision be made. Let's just figure this out once and for all. I feel very confident that the rule will stand on its own merits and we can move forward. But the challenge for this administration is they wanted to basically run through with the repeal, and they decided that the only hearing on the Clean Power Plan would take place in West Virginia. Is anybody surprised by that? I think the idea was that it might, bring more opposition to the hearing than we had before, and that people who were opposed to it might not want to go to West Virginia, because it's really not that easy. It wasn't that easy for folks to get to. But what happened was exactly not that. 81% of the people who commented, the comments received, were actually positive about keeping the Clean Power Plan intact. 81%. So you can't even hide these issues, folks. People care about them. They see the hurricanes, they see the droughts, they see the forest fires. They see people in Puerto Rico who have children who are actually going to Superfund sites to allow them to drink TCE contaminated water because we have failed to get them drinking water that meets standards. That is not the country that I thought I was in. That's not our expectation of what the federal government can do. And to have EPA under this administration simply say, well, if the children aren't drinking it for a really long period of time, maybe it won't be so bad. That's not where I want to be. And so people know we have a challenge. They are ready to step up. They don't want to see the rollbacks that this administration is proposing. And frankly, the fact that they're not talking to the career staff really tells me that they are not really articulating a thorough strategy that the court is going to recognize and support. So while we all get all twisted in a knot about what's going on with the rollbacks and are these things going to be rolled back, I think we have to calm ourselves, because a couple of things you need to remind yourself, and that I'm going to focus on with the students, is no matter what they're talking about in Washington, D.C., in the real world in which we live, the clean energy train in this country has left the station, and it is not going back. Because that's what the market is demanding. And if you're in the environmental business, when the market demands it, I love to be able to say, it's all about the economy, stupid. That's the best saying ever, when I hate it usually. Really, that's what's happening. We are seeing it take off like crazy. We are decoupled. We are allowing our economy to grow, while our greenhouse gas emissions from the fossil fuel sector of our energy system is like down to the 1994 levels. It is amazing what is happening in the country and across the world. We are seeing innovations, investments, solutions that are going to bring a brighter future to all of us. And if you're looking at the transportation sector, I know that we've got the car sector that is now asking to be free of regulations like fuel economy standards and other things. But honestly, folks, they were going bankrupt. We told them people might like to have energy efficient vehicles that are cleaner, and they made them, and they made lots of money. We had hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We had manufacturing start up again in the United States of America. Let's not kid ourselves that we can go backwards at this point. And you have to think about these electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles that my children are convinced is the only way to save them from my driving. They could be right. But it is something to look forward to about this generation, because they are not as enamored with their cars as we were. Yes, you need cars in certain places, but why can't we find a way to work together to make sure that the pollution from those cars are minimized? About new transportation systems. In fact, we are. Do you know Tesla has higher assets than GM and Ford? I mean, we are talking about a new generation here of young people that are demanding different types of options than we have available. And that's the one thing in this administration that we may lose. We may lose an opportunity to actually send long-term signals to our young people, to our technology developers, to our innovators, about what the value of the United States is and what we want to see in terms of our future, because it is not as clear as it once was. We need to send those long-term signals, because on issues like climate change, we don't have the solutions that are going to get us to the level that science dictates. And my last issue that I want to raise, and perhaps it's the one that I dwell on the most, is that there is an all-out attack on science today. It is happening both in the administration in Washington as well as in Congress, and it's happening at state levels. And it is a bit disturbing. It's certainly disturbing for me, because to me, science and higher education is the goal. It's what brought us tremendous success moving forward. And we see things happening like issues of climate science being taken off the webpage. They don't want to talk about climate adaptation and share information with communities about how to keep them safe. We have an EPA that's told our Science Advisory Board members that they no longer are welcome on the Science Advisory Board. Scientists that may have gotten any amount of money from EPA in the past are no longer able to be an advisor to EPA on issues that utilize their expertise, but they have no other interest or involvement in. And instead, they want more industry representatives who are not precluded from having a financial conflict. So these are damaging because they are changing the way in which peer-reviewed science is done throughout the world. It is going to make us an anomaly, and not in a good way. You know, it is going to damage the reputation of the United States, just as the effort to pull out of the Paris Agreement is damaging the reputation of the United States. You know, one of the reasons why President Obama in his second term decided to focus so much on climate change is that he has two young girls that he values more than anything in the world. And I think most of us, if you have children, that's how you feel. And he felt that you can't be the President of the United States and stick your head in the sand and not move forward. But his direction was do it in a way that drove investment in new technologies. Do it in a way that grew jobs moving forward. And we actually did that. The world has changed in a better way. There are a lot of new jobs in the clean energy sector, somewhere in the order of 225 to 250,000 people that are in that are the fields where young people actually want to move. And this has been a result of science. It's been a result of sending those longer-term signals. It's been a result of our ability domestically to send strong signals like we did with the Clean Power Plan and the car sector regulations. But it was also a result of us using the leverage of the presidency for a country that did take action to be able to work together to go to Paris 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago? In 2016, 15, to be able to move forward as an entire world and tackle this issue. That is what the United States is all about. We don't cede international leadership to anyone else, and we certainly don't think to undermine science, which has been the bedrock of how we have moved forward in this country to improve our lives and our prosperity. That's what we cannot tolerate. So we can argue about the Clean Power Plan, but please, don't bury your head in the sand and because science is inconvenient for you to look at, start denying it and fundamentally try to change the way in which science is done. So I know maybe I was not particularly truthful about the grumpy Gus and the Debbie Downer. But I think in the end, what you really need to remember is that we are a country of, by, and for the people. It is ours. And in many ways, what's happening today in Washington has to be a reflection of animosity in this country, of continuing difficulties. And instead of getting angry with other people, the most important thing we can do is try to bridge that gap. Try to talk to one another, try to remember our core values moving forward. And always keep in mind that while there's a lot of things going on at EPA, there are some things that will always remain true. And I think they are that we do care about the world we live in. We do care about public health, which is what EPA is really all about. We care about being leaders in the country. We do not want to go back to the 60s with our rivers burning or Los Angeles looking a lot like Beijing or Delhi is today. And we have a world where pollution knows no boundaries, where economies know no boundaries. So we have to remember that we are living in a world that has changed. We are not going to go backwards. We are going to move forward. And we have to demand that the people we elect move us forward to a cleaner and brighter future. And that is how it is going to head. And we will make sure that it gets here. If we keep gathering like we are tonight, sharing with one another our thoughts and our wishes for the future, and if we continue to have schools like Exeter, that is teaching children to think smarter and more equitable than we ever did before. Because I do have great faith that as much as we will fail, if we keep moving forward and keep challenging them, and if we educate them and we continue to nurture their spirit, then we will be just fine. So thank you, everybody, and I think I'd like to add by just one little statement from my father, who was really an interesting guy. He was a Boston public school teacher for 40 years. He taught Latin. I can't imagine it, but he did. Loved it, loved it, loved it. But when I was a kid and I whined, which really never happened, I can't imagine it. When I would whine, after listening to it for a while, he used to look at me and he'd say, Gina, can you just pull up your big old pants and take action and do something? So that's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that you need to pull up your big girl pants, pull up your big boy pants, pull up your gender neutral pants, and take action. It will be just fine. Thank you very much. Questions? I have a number of them. Who wants to answer? Yes.
Who would you like to see be the next president?
Who would I like to see be the next president? I don't have an answer to that question. I would like to see the next president to be somebody that I respect, and somebody that I think will lead this country in a positive way. That's really what I care about. I care about great respect for this country and its democracy. I need somebody who is a public servant and knows that and acts. I've done it a long time, but not at that level. Yes?
So what can we do, if anything, to compel the DC Circuit Court to actually try Virginia et al. Versus EPA?
Okay, the question was, what can we do to compel the DC Circuit, which is the court that actually hears all Clean Air Act cases, and the Clean Power Plan was actually issued under the Clean Air Act. It was basically to address an air pollutant, carbon pollution from the fossil fuel energy sector. And I cannot tell you how many times I've asked that question. I'm surprised, frankly, that it hasn't been something that was done more quickly. The DC Circuit fully heard this case. That's what's funny about the Clean Power Plan. It actually is 45 pages long with 11 pages of basically legal arguments, which is ludicrous. I mean, it's just for a rule that's big like this, you do a lot more work than that normally. The DC Circuit, just to list the list of litigants involved in the court action there, it was 27 pages, single-spaced. I mean, so it doesn't match 11 pages of legal arguments, 7.5. But anyways, so we are waiting to see how patient the DC Circuit is. They basically, their entire argument that they seem to be talking about is the legal issue, the legal underpinnings of the Clean Power Plan, which is basically how should we interpret a specific statute of the Clean Air, specific provision in the Clean Air Act that has not been used particularly often, and certainly not in the energy sector. So there is an issue that is compelling the court to be able to make a legal determination. And it is the very issue that the administrator at EPA says is the reason why he wants to repeal, is to basically redo the rule because he thinks we went outside the boundaries of the Clean Air Act in how we designed the Clean Power Plan, which tells me he should tell the DC Circuit to actually make a decision, if that were his concern. And the interesting thing about the Clean Power Plan repeal rule is that the rule actually has a cost-benefit analysis in it, which all rules have to have. And that cost-benefit in a little one of the scenarios basically shows that more people's lives will be saved than was originally anticipated, and the costs are much less. So there is nothing that would tell me that if the administrator of EPA is really interested in saving lives and doing something that is even more efficient than what was originally anticipated, then I would suggest that he stop going through the couple-of-year process of repeal and simply ask the DC Circuit to stop the stay and make a decision. Because then you'd know. Then it will be done, one way or the other.
You're probably afraid that it would pass.
Well, you know, I think a lot of what's happening here is, again, they're not particularly working, I think, diligently with the career staff, and they really just need, I think, to get more immersed in what the agency does and how it does it and how you're supposed to work these issues. Because it's not easy to do this stuff, but you have to learn it, you have to be open to it, and you have to embrace the mission of the agency. And that's, I think, a challenge that many of us have articulated is certainly I have a lot of Republican colleagues that were administrator of EPA, and they've cited the same thing, the continued lack of embracing of the actual mission of the agency, which is disturbing. Yes?
Would you address the agricultural sector?
Yep, if I could.
What?
Yes. I'm tempted to say, hello, agriculture.
There's a lot of area there to cover.
Yeah, it is. It's very challenging, and the more we learn about agriculture, in particular, the challenges associated with climate change, both in terms of what it's doing to challenge agriculture to continue to be done in a way that is productive and that maintains soil nutrients on site, that can adjust to both a flood condition and a drought condition. It's extremely challenging to be in agriculture today.
Well, we have both the things such as animal waste problems,
Yes.
and the overflow of products going down the Mississippi, and the dead area in the Gulf of Mexico.
That's for sure, and in Long Island Sound, and in Lake Champlain. I mean, there was a 600-mile algal bloom in the Ohio River just a few years ago. And it's an algal bloom that basically produces cyanotoxins that can get into drinking water, which is what closed the drinking water system in Toledo. And it really is attributable to the nutrients that are flowing off of agriculture. And, you know, I think It's very challenging right now to figure out how you work with agriculture. I think most farmers would say right now that they're very challenged to make a living, and I don't dispute that. But there's nothing in the way in which commodities are sold that really provides a real incentive to use the best practices moving forward. You don't get rewarded for being a really good farmer these days. And we need to just rethink that relationship, and we need to get them into the system to be able to look at how you don't just use modern agriculture that may have been successful to get us here, but I don't think is going to be the type of agriculture we need when we move forward. And there are ways of preserving soil health. There are ways of keeping nutrients in the ground, which is where you need them. But it's very challenging, and it's not within the context of regulation that is going to allow us to be successful. So I don't have an answer for you. I don't know how to get the attention of agriculture in a way that allows partnerships to happen in a way that other sectors do. I wish I did, because I do think they're very committed to protecting natural resources, but we haven't been able to get traction to actually have practices that would protect those resources in today's world, readily accepted and more broadly accepted. It's just not happening. I wish I had an answer. I don't have it. Do you?
Well, we can do a lot to save the world and save ourselves by moving away from animal products as in our diets. We walk into the supermarket, and that's a moral challenge in there when you go in there as to what you're going to buy.
Well, the more data that I see, science data tells us that you're not at all wrong about the challenge that we're facing with agriculture, but that is our entire cultural system that is going to be enormously difficult to change.
It's a tough problem.
This is going to be probably the last issue that actually gets significant traction, because you cannot regulate agriculture like that, and you can't regulate culture. You're talking about behavior change that you're really going to have to initiate, and you're talking about getting agriculture together in a trusting relationship. And I worked hard to make that happen, but I was not successful. I wasn't successful with the Clean Water Rule, which they demanded a rule. We delivered it. I listened. I adjusted it. I think I did a really good job on it, and it got absolutely no support in the agriculture community. Very little anyways. It's really hard. Yeah.
You were talking before about how you find it dismaying that that the current EPA isn't embracing the mission.
Yeah.
It was under, I can't remember if it's Reagan or Bush one, that the EPA was actually kind of sanctioned for not doing their job.
Yeah.
Do you have any fears that this, or hopes, I don't know which one, that this administration may face the same legal challenges for not embracing the mission enough?
I do think, well, first of all, I want everybody to understand that the job of EPA is not an easy one, in case that may have eluded you. Everything is litigated. The kind of science that we need to do in order to make the complex decisions that we have to make today, it's extraordinary. And so it's very hard to make progress moving forward. And especially when you are facing new challenges, and which we constantly were. But everything is litigated. So I have no doubt that every substantive issue that can be litigated that this administrator will move forward to will be litigated. And it takes a long time to work through the litigation. I wouldn't say that's good news, it's just factually what's happening. And I think you will see that most of the actions they're trying to take that are rule-related, that have an opportunity to go to court, you will see that they'll have difficulty, at least on the basis of what I am reading in terms of the rules they're proposing. 3 times they were taken to court for shortcutting the process of rules, and they were thrown in, and the courts basically chastised them all 3 times.
What about enforcement, though?
Enforcement is, did you read the article today? There was a big article today in the New York Times on enforcement and EPA, where they took a look at it, and they basically revealed the fact that inside the administration at EPA, they have told the regions that really manage the bulk of the implementation and oversight for the agency. They were told that they can no longer move forward with routine work like information requests from businesses where you suspect that the community is experiencing excess levels of pollution above what the limits that are in their permits. And it's a routine matter that, frankly, we don't interfere with. Enforcement is like a third wheel. You have a system on how to do it, you're transparent, you ask the public about where you should be your priorities, and then a smart person like you never touches it. Because it's a third real issue. You don't want to intervene in compliance matters. But apparently this administration told them they can't ask questions like that of businesses because you need to have already sort of the proof that you need to ask before you ask it. So it's sort of a little do-loop, and as a result, the article at least indicated that the numbers are way down in terms of the enforcement and oversight that the administration is providing. And that they will, if there is an opportunity to sue, somebody will, but I don't know whether there is. I had over right here, and then these two. Yep. Hi.
I have 2 big questions. Hi.
Could you stand up because people have been having a hard time?
So I have questions about young people and I have questions about clean power. So which
Yes.
one do you want?
Both.
So I work with a lot of young people here at the University of New Hampshire. I'm an environmental scientist. And the younger generation gets climate change, where a lot of the older generation, I don't know, beats their head against the wall denying climate change. Probably not most of the people here in this room. But they don't seem to get that keeping our air and land and water clean is an ongoing maintenance process. They think that we had the 70s and we had the 80s, we cleaned up the water, we cleaned up the land, we cleaned up the air, and they don't understand the amount of ongoing energy, science, and technology involved in maintaining that. And so, do you have any thoughts on how it's almost kind of a yin and yang. Older folks get that we still need to maintain water, land, and air, whereas young people think that that box has been checked. Whereas older people don't get this climate stuff, and so we're dealing with this generational.
Maybe we should all talk to each other. Huh? That'd be unique. I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think there's real challenges here, and it's really about human nature. It really is. I think one of the biggest challenges we had on climate change was that we failed to make it personal. Nobody talks about public health implications of climate change. I'm just amazed by that, because they are rather extreme, both direct and indirect challenges. And so I agree with you that young people get climate change because we're talking about it all the time, right? And they know that there's contention around it. But they read the newspapers about the disruptions, and they can figure that out. What they're missing is the personal experience of having lived in the 60s and seeing it. So the interesting thing about the polling that I see on climate is that the vast majority of people in this country understand it's happening, young and old. But I think the challenge is that the vast majority don't believe that it's ever going to impact their lives. So what you're seeing from young people is they've never experienced anything like we had experienced with visible pollution. And if you don't see it, it's not happening, right? It's not front and center in your brain. And so they're able to dismiss it too readily and have the confidence that we won't go back there. I'm pretty confident we won't go back there, but you are facing exposures to pollutants in the United States today that is impacting your health and well-being. It's impacting the future of your kids. And in some ways, it's in more systemic ways than the visible stuff we used to see. And so we do have challenges communicating that because we have to make the case based on science. And that's one of the challenges with undermining science, is that you have an inability to rally the troops, even the younger. But I will tell you that we estimated there is something in the order of there's over $600 billion in investments needed in water and drinking water infrastructure in this country over the next, now it's, I guess, 19 years. That you have to do it, because you can't rely on really old systems to be able to continue to protect drinking water systems. Not when you've had thousands of chemicals on the market that end up in drinking water and end up in dust in your homes, end up in your lungs and in your food supply. Those are very challenging problems. Yes, and then back there. Yeah.
Well, on the market side, it seems that there is a growing demand for organic and local produce. So you have your, I understand that the hydroponic farming industry is growing.
Yeah.
And you have people like my children's generation who want that kind of food. You have restaurants serving that kind of food.
Yep.
You have Amazon buying Whole Foods. And you have Walmart looking for more organic food to sell. It seems to me you have some of these same market forces that are producing the electric cars that's at work. And maybe you think that's too small to be significant.
I think it's a big deal. You're wrong. I think it's a big deal. I totally agree that there are other players today than government that will make market shifts. And I think that's a really important message. You know, one of the messages I'm going to give to the students tomorrow is to remind them that the federal government does play a role, but it's not everything. And the federal government, I've worked at all levels of government, the federal government never has a unique idea. They just don't. You know, but everything starts at the grassroots level. In my world, everything is started at the grassroots level. And then the grassroots stuff gets really aggressive, and people want change, and all of a sudden states get annoyed and they have to do what the grassroots folks say. And then the states get really annoying, and then the federal government needs to intervene, and then they have this brilliant, innovative idea to do exactly what the grassroots folks told them to do. So I don't dispute that at all. There are really big momentums. I think the challenge in agriculture is industrial farming. And that is really the challenge. And I absolutely agree with you that there is a significant interest in investment in locally grown food. Farmers markets are where it's at. It just needs to continue to be pushed and scaled up. But it is not going to be competition to industrial farming. There has to be a legitimate effort to try to manage those issues in a way that other sectors have managed themselves. It's just, so it's challenging, but all signs are great. You know, Walmart, it is a really interesting case in point for the new toxic chemicals that I'm sort of I was referring to before. Did you know that Walmart was really aggressive in looking at endocrine disruptors in baby bottles, BPA, bisphenol A? They basically, because of consumers, and they heard about this, they just decided that they weren't going to buy any more baby bottles with bisphenol A in it. And so they took them off the shelves and won't buy it. And if Walmart won't buy your product, it's a big deal. So they single-handedly raised attention to this issue in a way that changed the way in which baby bottles were being produced. And so there is huge opportunity working with the private sector. That's one of the reasons why I actually am at the center at Harvard, is we're going to start taking advantage of actors other than government. Because government, even on its best day, is not particularly nimble to deal with these issues. And I think the business sector is ready to step up, and I think that's one of the things that I've seen that I don't think this administration would anticipate. States are more active, local governments are more active, individuals are more active, and businesses are getting more active. So that's really fun. And it's a very positive sign, because that's where all the new stuff comes from. I had one over here and then one back there. And I'm sorry, and I have one over here. All right, quick.
Yeah, I'm an environmental scientist too, and a state legislator. I want to echo some of the things that have said over there. We are seeing, in my opinion, I've worked very closely with a couple of environmental issues in the Seacoast area, and we are seeing the effects of the EPA cutting back right now. We see one public relations person come to our meetings. We hear about the attempt for the EPA to talk about how they're going to regulate PSCs, but really no structure, no real commitment to actually doing it. We hear the things that you talked about in the New York Times article today. We want to give our public and our children something to work toward. What kind of steps do you think that we could best take to be the most effective to really get the message to the government, to the EPA, that we're not going to stand for this type of stuff?
Well, probably talking to them, and I think talking to your legislative representatives, your folks in Congress. You know, I really cannot tell you what is the most effective strategy to basically make the administration change its direction in which it's headed. If you can figure that out, I think it would be great. You know, I just don't, you know, they seem to be sort of immune to normal levels of criticism. And so what you do, I don't know, but I think making a point and trying to work with your congresspeople are a good idea. I do think that it matters that people articulate what they feel, and particularly where you have a localized problem. That's when EPA is usually there to address those challenges, because the things you need at the federal level that are extraordinarily important because it can't happen at other levels is the technical and scientific expertise. You can't have that in every community or every state. And so it's extraordinarily important that you speak up.
I wanted to ask you, what's going on inside the EPA? And assuming this is a short-lived administration, what would be left of the knowledge and the expertise and the experience that is in the agency now? Are people heading for the doors? Are they sticking it out? What's happening?
Well, you know, I will tell you that I know a little bit from hearing from people who are hearing from people. I do not talk to the folks at EPA because it would put them at risk if I did. So I've been reading the papers like you have. I see a lot of the folks at EPA that were in the agency for a long time that have decided that it's time to move on. And I have to respect them, although I told them they can't do that before I left, but I guess I'm losing my juice. So they just feel like there's not a place for them right now. And it's very sad to read that they're leaving, but they've done a great service to the country, and they have a right to do what they need to do to keep themselves productive and happy. But there's a lot of younger people, I think, is my understanding, that have left as well. Folks that expect that with the budget is expected to be cut even worse than the president's budget, which called for a 31% reduction. Specifically, half the scientists at the agency will be gone. And there's a lot of young people, and that's the systemic damage. It's both what's happening on the attack to science, how our enforcement rules are now being, and policies are now being done, the policies around the Science Advisory Board, the sort of taking down of information on the website so that people don't have all the facts when they get there. Those are the systemic things that bother me way more than any regulatory action that's done or undone. That's what makes it a science agency. That's what makes it effective in supporting individual communities and states. That's what's most disturbing. So they're losing folks, but I still think there's a lot of people left. And I think part of the challenge is going to be whether or not there is a budget and what that budget looks like. And it won't look as bad as it actually is, Because what they do is they basically, folks in Congress, when they negotiate the budget, they'll look at the stuff that's most important to them. You'll see a restoration of all of the geographic programs, because their constituencies will know whether or not they took away money from the Great Lakes, the Chesapeake, or Long Island Sound, or Lake Champlain. But what they won't know is that in order to redo those, which I agree they should be funded, they'll take it out of the core of the agency, the ones that pay the salaries and the rent. So you'll have lots of wonderful programs without individuals qualified to run them, or scientists who inform them, or people who understand the technologies and where things are heading. So that's the challenge for the agency, is that it is going to be devastated under current budget proposals. And that's going to be damaging for local communities, because we won't be there. I don't know who the Ghostbusters are that you're going to call, but I guess that's it. I'm going to come here and then down there. Yeah.
Thank you. We hear, like in California, that the state of California is comparable to China in its policies on the environment. A smaller state like New Hampshire has some more difficulty because we just don't have the population, we don't have the economic power to influence things. Are there some things that you can think of that should happen in a state such as New Hampshire that would help to improve our environment?
Yeah. You know, I actually think New Hampshire's doing pretty well. I hate to tell you that, because I'd like to make more demands. But you're actually doing well. I mean, I think what I always recommend to states is to look at setting renewable and efficiency goals if you can. I think the work that you're doing on Reggie is good. You're part of it. You're sticking in with it. They're thinking about lowering the cap so that it becomes more aggressive. The great news about that is it means it's going to generate more money for you to be able to invest in energy efficiency and other support to energy consumers, which actually is, I think, a really good thing. So that dynamic works. But you just got to continue to be consistent, and you've got to, I guess what I'd encourage you to do is the setting of goals, because I think what you need more than anything is that signal that we may be missing at the federal level. Is that signal about what do you want your world to look like? And you may not be able to get there, but setting a goal tells innovators and technology developers that you're open and you want to move progress forward. And what you decide to do in terms of how your economy manages that should be left up to the state to understand and identify. But I think setting goals is a really good thing, and looking at options moving forward for what makes sense economically and how do you do it. You know, one of the reasons one of the things I'm working on is that there's a lot of scientists who are working together to try to identify the public health and economic benefits of a variety of carbon strategies. Because in my opinion, I would like to have benefits today, and I'd like benefits for the planet tomorrow. And I think you can do that if you're smart. And I think we've got to be able to make everybody as smart as we can, because this is a long haul in order to get where we need to go. Okay, I said down there,
Yes.
And then right here. Yep.
You mentioned the failure of the term climate change to affect people personally. Anyway, I'd like to know your opinion about changing the term to something that has much more impact, such as climate chaos or climate catastrophe.
I don't know, names aren't my thing. I've had some fun with the scientists on this issue, because I don't think it's what you call it, I think it's how you explain it. The first thing we did with climate a long time ago was to put the picture of a polar bear floating out on an ice sheet. That does not capture the imagination. It doesn't give you a sense that it's about you and your family and your kids. Yes, it might make you feel bad for that polar bear, but you're not going to change life as we know it to do that. And so we have failed to really personalize it. And what I tell the scientists is that, I love them all dearly, but, if they actually could more clearly say what what they're learning, it would really be helpful, because they all talk to each other. They write very highly technical documents that only one another, like a little club, can read. And I want to know what it means for me and my family. And so I think they have difficulties with that, and especially on climate change. You know, they're so surprised that when the IPCC says it's very likely that anthropogenic emissions are a significant cause of climate change, that it's not a deal breaker, right? Most human beings read that and go, oh my God, they don't know what they're talking about. It's a crapshoot. It's just sort of very likely. How many times do I flip a coin? You know what I mean? And they don't understand that most people actually think they should speak factually about what they know, rather than talk about uncertainties related to it. And so there's drama in the science community about this, about how to speak more clearly. And I always tell them they need to say three things. One is they need to say climate change is real, that man-made emissions are causing it, and which is why women need to rule the world. I think it's very clear. Very crisp, clear, truthful statement. One more question, and I know you had your hand up.
Oh, I was going to ask you what you thought the influence of the international community had on our EPA, if any, directly, indirectly.
In what sense?
Sort of with the Paris Accord, not joining it. I know that they're meeting separately without us, without our leaders.
Yeah.
Is that...
Yeah, it's really not a good situation. I will tell you that the president put out, President Obama put out a climate action plan, and that's what we were following, and that's why we were being responsible and trying to demonstrate the U.S. commitment so that we could get a Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement it's the most fun plane ride I ever took back. I was not in a private plane, and I was not flying. But the whole plane was filled with people. Like, we were flying 1,500 feet above the plane. It was so cool to have a real commitment done. So it was really disappointing. We're going to lose a lot by not being at the table. Mostly it's going to be, basically the rest of the world not having EPA look over their shoulder, because EPA was sort of the gatekeeper. We were the ones that trained other countries about how to do inventories, how to measure reductions. We wanted professional staff that were in these, especially in the developing world, to help build capacity to be able to do this work. There is not an EPA there doing that work now. That's a problem, and it should be a problem for this president, because you want everybody to be accountable. You want to know that they're counting correctly, or else you're going to be investing in the wrong things, and you're not going to be able to understand where the opportunities are and where investment should be. But I think just the most important thing for us about not being in Paris is to make sure that the rest of the world understands that that was a decision of the president, but that president was not speaking to every level of government and the business community. So the most hopeful thing was the fact that the U.S. sent just a couple of delegates, but they didn't disrupt anything. And the vast majority of people from the United States were there, wholeheartedly supporting the Paris Agreement and basically making it understood to other countries who don't necessarily understand our government structure that states and local communities can do it regardless of the commitment at the federal level. And in fact, what I'm going to remind the students tomorrow is that nothing on climate change happened until the last administration. So don't tell me that we can't make progress here, especially with the business community stepping up and really being part of it. So while I might wake up to my husband screaming and yelling at MSNBC every morning, I go to bed feeling pretty good. That this country's heading in the right direction, and we're going to get there because this is, after all, the United States of America. Thanks, everybody.